All right, everyone, I'm sorry for the delay. We had some technical difficulties. This is the planning board meeting for Wolfeboro, Tuesday, December 17th, 2024. I am Doug Breskin, chairperson. To my left, we have Vaughn Dugan, Peter Goodwin, Roger Murray, Kathy Barnard, Jane Nielsen, Brad Harriman, and Julie Jacobs. The first item on the agenda is the zoning amendment public hearings. I'm hoping, we need to appoint an alternate. Yes, thank you. So I don't remember who is next in line. Julie, would you serve as an alternate for this evening? Thank you. I'm hoping everybody can see the presentation that's up on the screen behind me. The first item to go through is 175-175, terms defined dwelling unit. If we could go to the next slide. In just a moment, we're having a little difficulty here. That's all right. Very good. This is what you see on the screen is the current definition of dwelling unit, 175 in the terms defined section, which is defined as one or more rooms arranged, designed, or used as for residential purposes for one household and containing independent sanitary and cooking facilities. The presence of cooking and sanitary facilities conclusively establishes the intent to use for residential purposes. Quote, dwelling unit, unquote, is further defined as follows. A dwelling multi-unit, a building and accessories thereto principally used, designed, or adapted with 3 or more dwelling units, each of which has separate living quarters. B, dwelling unit duplex, a building and accessories thereto principally used, designed, or adapted with 2 dwelling units of similar proportions, the living quarters for each which are completely separate. A single-family dwelling unit with an accessory dwelling unit is not a duplex dwelling unit. Lastly, C, dwelling unit, single family, a building and accessories thereto principally used, designed, or adapted as a single dwelling unit. The addition of an accessory dwelling unit to a single dwelling unit does not change the status of the single dwelling unit to a duplex dwelling. If we go to the next. This is the proposed definition for 175 terms defined. Dwelling unit, a building or portion thereof providing complete independent living facilities for one or more persons, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. This use shall not be deemed to include such transient occupancies as hotels, motels, boarding houses, inns, bed and breakfasts, or short-term rentals. Further goes on to say a dwelling is defined as a building or portion thereof containing 1 or more dwelling units. A, single-family dwelling, a building consisting of a single dwelling unit. The addition of an accessory dwelling unit to a single-family dwelling does not change the status of a single-family dwelling to a duplex dwelling. Duplex dwelling. A building consisting of 2 dwelling units of similar proportions. A single-family dwelling unit with accessory dwelling unit is not a duplex dwelling unit. Multifamily dwelling, a building consisting of 3 or more dwelling units. Next slide, please. Thank you. This is the comparison between the existing definition and the proposed definition. The differences primarily are the change in wording to replace the term household with complete independent living facilities for 1 or more persons. The definition will focus on the structure instead of the occupants. So I'll ask the board, I suppose, shall we have public comment after each of these rather than going all through them? So I would move to open the floor to public comment. Would anybody like to speak? We're going to play handoff with the microphone.
Thank you. Audrey Klein, North Main Street. So it appears that the change that was made to the duplex dwelling means that the only difference between a single-family dwelling with an accessory apartment and a duplex dwelling is maybe 1 square foot of habitable space. And there's no other kind of indication that they might be different in any other ways. And I think I think they need to be called out more, because a duplex, well, an ADU is supposed to be integral to a single-family dwelling, which means from a physical construction standpoint, they can and mostly likely do share services such as water service, meter, electric meter, main electric panel, smoke alarms, maybe access from the street and driveway spaces. Whereas a duplex, historically and traditionally, is literally two independent single-family dwellings attached in some manner, and therefore they don't share services. They each have their own electric meter, their own electrical panel, separate water meters, although they might have one service from the street. Fire separation is required between the dwelling units. Often they have a separate street address. It's 42 and 44, not 42A and 42B. And they can be condoized. And when they're condoized, those separate services become really important, because then they have to have contracts for who takes care of what. If they share a septic system, share outdoor spaces, as far as plowing, roof repair, and all that. So I think that this definition is just way too simple to impart the idea that they are two complete separate single-family dwellings attached together. So I would suggest the language something like duplex dwelling, a building consisting of two dwelling units with code-required fire separation and independent utilities. A single-family dwelling unit with an accessory dwelling unit is not a duplex dwelling. So I don't think it needs to be a lot of change, maybe just some specific language. And I assume you need this. Okay.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak?
Ann Blodgett, I think for those watching, you need to tell people what the purpose, what you're trying to do here is. It's a lot of words, more confusion. You've got other warrant articles that are more straightforward. I would ditch this till next year. Thank you.
Part of the reason for this is the Conway case involving short-term rentals. If we do not make this change to the zoning ordinance, we cannot regulate short-term rentals. We will have a problem.
So Ann's question is, if this doesn't pass and short-term rentals does, what happens?
There is a potential problem, because in the Conway case, the New Hampshire Supreme Court interpreted the definition in that ordinance, which is virtually identical to our present language, as allowing single-family dwellings to be used as short-term rentals as a permitted use. This definition incorporates the language from the Portsmouth case, which is Working Stiff Partners. And in that case, the court upheld the regulation because of a definition similar to what we have here. And so the purpose of this, it also gets away from the household, because the Supreme Court basically said that if the planning board went out and rented a house, we'd be a household. And so the intent is to get rid of the household and the potential problems that that would create.
So you got to make this clear to the public. And how are you going to do that? Because if people are going in and saying, I'm just going to vote for the short-term rental thing, I mean, if they're not watching tonight, how are they going to know all the intricacies and the interwoven pieces? I don't know. I mean, I think you've got some splaining to do, as Ricky Ricardo would say.
Yes, thank you. You're correct. We do have to make sure that that's clear. The presentation or the PowerPoint that we're showing this evening will be posted on the website, and we will add to it to address the concerns we're hearing this evening. Any further comments from the public? And any comments from the board? Yep.
I think that it is relatively straightforward. The proposed change in wording replaces the word or term household with complete independent living facilities for one or more persons. And to me, that is, the household was sort of a fuzzy definition, and this is a more concrete one. So I don't know as it's really a problem to let people know.
Yeah, I would say it is, and to the point that Ann made, it's clear what the definition means, but we need to make clear to the public why we're changing the definition and what the purpose of the change is, not just what the change is, but the purpose of it. So, thank you for the questions. Any other comments from the board? If that's the case, then we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is Article 24, Conservation Subdivision, to amend Article 24 to include the following: removal of exemptions, add specified zoning districts in which permitted, and revisions to standards of review and development requirements. Vaughn, do you want to take over here?
So the reason that we are addressing this conservation subdivision ordinance, we had one prior and it had some major problems. In fact, it was never being used. One of the big problems was it was required on every property and every subdivision of land coming in. And what was happening was nobody was opting to use it. And the result was every parcel that was being developed as 3 lots on a road, and then the remainder was just leftover land. And the whole idea of the conservation subdivision is to preserve open space and not have a lot of lots on the road. Let's say it's not a major road, and I've got on the example up here, Country Road is the name I gave this piece of land. We're just calling it Country Road, and I did a comparison here. Well, actually, I think I'll show you this first to give you a graphic of the difference between two things, and then I'll go through the conservation subdivision language and explain why this visually and physically does what we're proposing. So in this slide and in the next slide, it's exactly the same imaginary parcel of land. It's 100 acres, and in this case I used a 5-acre zone, and this is the standard subdivision method, and you've seen it throughout town in the past. Winnipesaukee Estates, I think, is something like this, a road that loops around off of another major road and has lots off of it. There's another one called Ridgeview off of 109, Ridgeline View, up near off of Hemlock Drive in 109, that does something like this, although it's a T shape of roads. So what I did was I divided this parcel up into 5-acre lots with at least 150 foot of frontage, but in most cases more, with a loop road like those subdivisions have. Now on this page and this parcel, like the next slide, I put in some area up in the top right corner that's over 25% slopes, and in the bottom corner some poorly drained and very poorly drained soil, just so you could see what the effect is. And In the regular subdivision, those sensitive areas can be subdivided into the lots. The same 30-foot setback, for instance, on the poorly drained soil is in effect no matter what. But those lots can consume very poorly drained soils and steep slopes. Each of those lots also will require a septic system and a well. That's one thing. On the right-hand side, what you see is our formula, and if you have the handout, it's on page 3. And what you do is you take the parcel size, this is for a conservation subdivision, and you subtract poorly drained soils, you subtract the slopes greater than or equal to 25%, and then in the conservation version, which this slide is not, you take 5% for potential right-of-way. They're very similar, but the size of the individual lots, you'll see, is very different. So if you can change the slide. So this is, just a kind of a quick conservation subdivision with a road and a cul-de-sac, but it's not quite. It's a circle around a green. I just imagined this sort of scenario as opposed to the bunch of grapes scenario that sometimes you'll see where it's 2 or 3 cul-de-sacs with little lots around them. So this is as simple as you could get, and it's more than 50% of the area from the green line out is the conservation open space. And it includes the very poorly and poorly drained soil and the 25% slopes. And if you look at the upper part of the residential circle, I drew lots, little 1/3 of an acre lots with houses on them. And the bottom part of the circle, I drew no lots, because that will be up to the individual developer on how they want to manage the land. And I know it sounds strange, but to us, because we don't have many of these. Maybe Wolfeboro Commons has no individual lots. I can't remember. Yes, that's true. And I've lived in one of these in Manchester. And in the case, the development that I lived in, you had a limited common area on the side of your house or behind your house. So I drew little boxes behind the houses without lots. And then the rest of the land was common area, limited common area. So you could put gardens and other things in them. And in that case, for instance, the outside of the houses were even covered by the association. So associations take care of all the common property. And we, as a board, would review, and the attorney, the language of those agreements. So if you look at this version nets out at 17 dwelling units by formula. And interesting in this case, 5% ended up being greater than, if you go back to the prior slide. Hello? Can you go back one? It's less than that road, which seems a little bit aggravating, but we have in this ordinance a provision that says the planning board is granted the authority to reduce the percentage deducted for the right-of-way when you see what the actual percentage is. And in this case, you'd basically pick up another lot, so it would become equal in the conservation subdivision and not less, which it is in this case that I invented. So to go back through the ordinance, some of the key features that the purpose has is preservation of open space. And you can see that when you have more than 50% of open space, as on the other slide, it protects your natural resources. They don't become privatized. They don't end up on individual people's lots. If you look at the objectives, and I hope you got a handout. Did they get handouts? Were they available? Okay. So the idea is to reduce the length of roads and pavement, basically. Discourage sprawl, so all of the land is not consumed. And so you get open space, and I drew a tiny little dotted line through it because we're allowing paths through the conservation land. It also facilitates the provision of public services, shorter roads. It really doesn't impact much the police and fire and bus service influences. It's a more efficient use of the land, especially considering the natural characteristics. Basically it preserves them. We would be reviewing that the developer or development comes in and that the usable or the open space is contiguous, and in this case I just basically chopped off most of the back of the parcel. It also has a potential it would conserve woodlands, steep slopes, streams, floodplains, wetlands, wildlife corridors. You can see there's a lot less occupation of the land in this scenario. And so therefore, it minimizes the impact on the environmental resources. Imagine a watershed area somewhere in the back of this land. Basically, it remains undeveloped, so all the trees and natural materials would remain on the site in those areas. It also, by definition, basically eliminates views of the housing and the development from, we'll call it Country Road here. That's 2,000-foot frontage in this scenario. And basically no house lots will be allowed on that entrance road. So everything is embedded in the site and not like the prior version had 6 lots on the street. They were big lots, but there are still 6 lots facing the public way. Of course, it retains more of the existing vegetation, that's J, if you have to conserve at least 50%. So another thing is the common ownership is not only the open space, but any roadways or common features, let's say in that green, I tried to draw like a little gazebo. There might be somewhere in the limited common area. I've got some leach fields out there. It could be recreational facilities or gardens or, many different things. But in the open space that is more than 50 acres out of this 100, none of that can occur. So it has multiple possibilities for different kinds of uses while preserving more than 50% in open space. So, as far as the method of doing this, basically the developer would come in and we would review and go through these criteria and make sure that all of the criteria we feel are met. There's contiguous space. There's a logic to the preservation of the sensitive features. We're leaving the lot size, as I said earlier, completely up to the developer. In this, I just drew tiny little 1/3 of an acre lots on the upper half and no lots on the bottom half. It depends on the description in the covenants of the association. So the biggest benefits, of course, are the undisturbed, undeveloped land, the buffer to the major roadways, so you're not going to see these houses. You may get, let's say it's tight up to the 100-foot setback. It's potentially that way. It's not likely to be that way, but that's as close as you could be to the road. And if potentially another lot near this lot either has open spaces and paths on it or will be developed in this manner, the open spaces, we would like to have interconnected networks of open spaces for wildlife and natural resources, just to make potential connections between the natural areas.
One of the things that should be realized is that many years ago there was another conservation easement or program set up, which was used a couple times, but hasn't really been used since then. The other thing is that if this passes, it does not preclude other classic developments. In other words, we are just not saying you have to do conservation easements, but it is allowing a conservation easement, which I believe is something which is more beneficial to the people who live there. And as you notice, the development which is inside of the area with no road frontage, the people driving down the road end up having no view of houses. And so it ends up being perhaps a better view for those people driving the road. I think that it is something which gives an opportunity for a developer to make good decisions and to make a community or a little area where people live, have a very nice time, and also can enjoy nature. And you know, on the first thing with a standard development, you can't have a trail that goes through the woodlands to look at the wetlands and things like that because it's on private property. Anyway, I think that this is an option which people can use, and I think that based on the way that it's set up now, it is something that will be used rather than the past regulation, which was not used much in the recent history.
Any questions? I'm not the chairperson.
I've got the mic.
It's a power grab.
We'll open the session up for public comment. Thank you.
Oh, is that what you had to say? I could have said Doug wants to say. So ridgeline development has been creeping into Wolfeboro. People are coming up from the other side of a ridge. Would this successfully preserve ridgeline? It is powerful.
So the only thing technically protected is 25% slopes greater cannot be developed. So it depends on the amount of slope. It's not, that was a separate ordinance we were talking about developing, and we haven't yet. Could be on our agenda. So it's not a ridgeline ordinance.
It would be great if you don't neglect it, because I will tell you that I see the ridgeline development creeping in, and look at other towns that allow ridgeline development, and it's just a very different developed look.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? Any other comments from the board? All right, we'll move on to the next item, which is 175-71 permitted uses in the village residential district, 175-81 permitted uses in the residential district, and 175-86 permitted uses general residential district, to amend by inserting a new subsection B, multifamily dwellings, in accordance with sections 175-143 through 175-145, and relettering accordingly. So you'll see here that it reads, are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number to be filled in as proposed by the Wolfeboro Planning Board to amend the Village Residential District, Section 17571, permitted uses, Residential District, Section 17581, permitted uses, and General Residential District, Section 17586, permitted uses, by inserting a new subsection B, multifamily dwellings, in accordance with Sections 175, 143 through 145, and relettering. There are currently no reference to the multifamily dwelling section in the permitted uses section of the zoning districts we've listed above. Multifamily dwellings are currently permitted in these districts pursuant to sections 175, 143 through 175, 145. The purpose of this article is to confirm that multifamily dwellings are permitted uses in the listed zoning districts. There's no change to the permitted uses in the districts. It's simply to direct somebody who is reading this section to look for the multifamily section, which is listed elsewhere in the ordinances. Would anybody else on the board like to make a comment? Any comments from the public?
This is going to be hard going back and forth. Well, maybe there won't be any back and forth. I don't know. If you recall, I've been before you before on this. I'm not going to try to make the argument about how to read this section because apparently the way this is laid out is something this planning board likes because you've done it to the short-term rental section. But what I do want to know, and I had asked, is what is the purpose behind what you're doing this year with this? And the answer was you wanted to make it clear to people what the section read like. So I guess I'm going to ask you some things that I'm confused about with the section and see if you would let me know how they're to be read. So, looking at the new language, you're sending people from the individual sections of the general residential, and village residential over to the multifamily section, 175, 143 through 145. So in that section, if I understand this correctly, multifamily dwellings are permitted at 2 units per acre. So anybody who has a 2-acre parcel can have a 4-unit building. Is that right? Okay, here, I'm giving you the microphone so you can tell me why that's not right.
You would need to be served by municipal water and sewer to have a density of up to 2 units per acre. For any other lots, it would depend on, they shall not exceed 2 units per acre or as required by high-intensity soil survey, and be whichever is less.
Okay, so has the planning board received information about how likely it is that a high-density soil survey is going to restrict a 2-acre lot from a 4-unit building? This is painful, but we got to go back and forth.
Well, my experience in representing clients who were subdividing lots was that there was rarely a lot that passed muster at 1 acre based on a high-intensity soil survey. Most of the best land in Wolfeboro has been used already, and it was very hard to find a lot that could be approved under a high-intensity soil survey that was less than 1 acre.
Okay, but we're not talking about lots that are less than 1 acre. We're talking about lots that are 2 acres, right?
Just say it.
Well, I think extrapolate what was the case with 1 acre, it probably would apply to 2 acres. And that is strictly in these zoning districts of the village residential, and general residential districts, elsewhere where they're not permitted.
So the high-intensity soil survey, is that the same survey that approves the ability to build a septic system?
I am not a septic designer, but I don't believe, I believe that is used, and has been used in our subdivision regulations to determine lot size. That's where it appears. And the idea, I believe, is to confirm that there is a buildable area on the lot.
So I'm pretty much speaking to lots that are already subdivided. So if the high-intensity soil survey is for the purpose of finding a septic system area on 2 acres, that's one thing. If it's for the purpose of subdividing, that might be another thing. Okay. Let me move on then. So I guess that's one of my points is, I guess the answer is, we don't know. So I'm going to say, it looks to me like somebody could have 4 units on a 2-acre lot, unless they were restricted somehow by soil. So going on to the next section here. D, 175, 144D, conversions of existing single-family residence. So and the way I read this, and tell me if I'm not correct here, any existing building can be converted or renovated into 4 units as long as the outside of this building stays the same and there's nothing expanding to adapt to be able to have 4 units. Doesn't say anything about soil survey. All it says is the lot must have 7,260 square feet per proposed unit. Is there something I'm missing there?
You would have to comply with the rest of the requirements under Section D, but I think the answer is no. You're not missing something.
So 7,260 square feet is 1/6 of an acre. So density, spoken in ways that density is spoken of in the rest of the ordinance, that's 6 units per acre, as long as you can comply with parking, essentially parking, and sewage disposal. So in every residential zone, you're allowed to convert an existing building to 4 units. Okay, shaking your head not, so please tell me why not.
You can only do that in the village residential, and general residential districts.
Yes, let me make a blanket statement. We're only talking about those 3 districts. I didn't mean to say we're talking about the shorefront or the rural, because we're not. So given that, looking at some of the lot sizes in many neighborhoods, Abenaki Estates Drive, at least half of the lots are more than 1.5 acres, with houses on them that would accommodate 4 units if somebody wanted to renovate. And an acre and a half is plenty of room for a septic system and parking, assuming the soils are okay. Robin Acres. I have at least a half a dozen lots that would accommodate that kind of renovation into 4 units on something slightly over an acre. Hemlock Drive and Ambrose, we were just talking about that area. Virtually every lot up there could be a multi-unit housing lot with 4 or more units. Oakwood Road, there's 5 lots with houses that could be turned into 4 units. And they're right on the peninsula next to the shorefront, but they're not in the shorefront. So I'm concerned that there's not yet enough information to go with this warrant article this year. I'd really like to see a planner spend some time gathering this kind of information so that you all can make a decision on these kinds of things. I think you're likely to find that you'll be creating some conflicts by mistake. For instance, in these zones where you're having these renovations of 4 units in one house, you can only have a duplex on an acre and a half, which is more land that you need than you need for a 4-unit apartment building. So
Are you suggesting that the warrant article that we're proposing would change the way that the multifamily ordinances are currently interpreted?
Well, I actually did a right to know to ask for all the building permits that have been submitted in the last 30 years for multifamily, and I can say that we haven't had any. So how is it being interpreted? I can't say, but it appears to me as if either nobody wants it because they're not building it, they're also not building duplexes, they're also not building accessory dwelling units, or it's being interpreted as not permitted. Not permitted.
This, I believe, was originally put in place in the 70s to try and prevent the tearing down of historic homes and to hopefully find a use for them, and as well as provide some affordable rental apartments. And some of the examples you mentioned, they're property owners associations with restrictions that would prohibit what they're doing. They also would need a special exception. This does not change what is currently the law. There have been multifamily dwellings. You've got some on Varney Road. You've got Paul Zimmerman's down in a shopping center. So I don't think it's correct to say there haven't been any in the last 30 years.
Really hard for me since I did not get a response to my right to know. But speaking of Paul Zimmerman's 6 units, that's in the C1 district, so we're not talking about that. The Varney Road one did come in for a process, which I don't recall which it was, but that was recently, and that building's been there for quite a while. I guess I'm not going to make the argument of whether or not this is correct. I'm making the argument that the board should have a lot more information, taking pieces of all of the zoning and making sure it lines up with what your intent is here before you make this scriber's change, if that's what you want to call it. I don't think it's ready. And let me go on. So you are changing one area. You're changing the Center Street Business District to not allow, well, it's part of this. Well, it's part of the multifamily section. Okay. I believe you. I'll wait.
So Center Street, we will get to. It's a separate warrant article. Sorry. Sure. So at Julie's request, I'm going to read out all of these related issues, which are all relating to multifamily. The one that we're on now is 17571, permitted uses for village residential, residential, and general residential. The next one will be for Bay Street Limited Business District and Wolfeboro Falls Limited Business District. The one after that is Pine Hill Road Development District. The one after that is South Wolfeboro Limited Business District. And lastly is the Center Street Route 28 Mixed Use Business District. So we will get to all of those in turn. I guess my last question, Audrey, would be, I understand that there may be some confusion in trying to determine what the density or permitted use is in this district that we're talking about now. But back to my original question, what we're trying to do here is make sure people who are reading this section understand that the multifamily section, which currently exists, applies to this district. We're not trying to change anything in multifamily, just make sure people are aware of it.
Thank you, and I think I did say I'm not going to argue that point. We disagree on that. I think that the way that this section is written in the beginning is and that you've used in the short-term rental section, exact same language, is the kind of language that's meant for an overlay district. And it's confusing to use it in this type of scenario when you could simply not do that. Having said that, I had another point. Right, so in trying to let people know what you believe this really says and that these things are permitted, without having had them duplexes, ADUs, or multifamilies built, why is this so important? I mean, it seems like nobody wants them. And it seems like to increase housing supply, working on duplexes and ADUs would be more.
And you may be correct. Again, one of the things we were trying to do here is address the failed warrant articles from last year, where we were trying to amend some of the multifamily. This is not changing any of the existing multifamily, as I said. It's just pointing to it. That's the essential purpose. And if we've made an error in how we're trying to accomplish that, we appreciate you trying to point it out. And perhaps it does take more work. Any further comment from the public? Anybody on the board want to make any further comments? No? All right. We'll go on to the next one, which is 175-106. H, permitted uses in the Bay Street Limited Business District, and 175-116H, permitted uses in the Wolfeboro Falls Limited Business District. To amend by, well, let's see. It reads, are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number blank as proposed by the Planning Board for the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to amend village, I'm sorry, we didn't advance, did we? Could we advance to the next slide? Thank you, there we go. Are you in favor of the adoption of the amendment number blank as proposed by the Planning Board for the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to amend the Bay Street Limited Business District Section 175-106H permitted uses and the Wolfeboro Falls Limited Business District Section 175-116H permitted uses by deleting H residential apartments not permitted on the first floor, restrictions established by multifamily provisions of this Part 1, in its entirety, and inserting in place thereof H multifamily dwellings in accordance with sections 143 through 145. So it's meant to remove the prohibition of residential apartments on the first floor in these zoning districts, and separately make clear that current multifamily ordinances in section 175 through 143 and 175, 145 apply. Would anybody on the board like to make any comment to that? No? Anybody from the public?
Can you just pull that?
Sure, sure. So the second part of it, sorry, Audrey's question was to have us explain the purpose of it. The second part is easier. It's, as we said in the previous one, to make sure people are aware that the multifamily section of the ordinance is applied to this district. And the first point there that you see with the residential apartments on the first floor is simply to allow residential apartments on the first floor and hopefully increase housing opportunities.
So the purpose is to increase housing opportunities. As I said last time, and I'll say this again, as we have more people who need more houses, we also need more businesses to serve the needs of those people. As time goes on, especially the last few years, downtown's become very strongly a tourist destination with tourist businesses, and the people that serve those businesses need to live someplace, which is what you're trying to do, but they also need services. And if you remove the commercial areas and leave them open for residential developments, I don't know when the last time any of you tried to go to the laundromat or tried to get daycare. There needs to be services in and around where people are going to live downtown, so that we're not either all coming into town in the tourist area or going out to Ossipee to wash our laundry. That, I think, is the purpose of leaving that in there. And I think, again, this could be done better with a scalpel instead of a hammer. Perhaps the overlay district, where the main streets don't have residential on the first floor but have business on the first floor, but the streets behind maybe are residential. So it would be more like an overlay district, and that would serve both purposes. And you need a planner.
So to be clear, we're not prohibiting businesses on the first floor. Yeah, yeah. So I just want to make clear, we're adding residential as a permitted use. We're not removing the ability to put businesses there. And I take your comment about needing a planner to heart, believe me. Would anybody else from the public like to speak? Anybody else from the board? Jane?
Yeah, my impression of, especially in the Wolfeboro Falls, was a chance to have more apartments or affordable housing. And if I worked in town and I lived out in the Wolfeboro Falls district and there was a downstairs business that was empty and somebody wanted to convert it to an apartment, I'd be grateful, because I could easily walk back and forth to work. And now we've opened this up and it's much more flexible. Whereas if you just make it for a business and there are no businesses that want to be there because maybe the places aren't big enough or there isn't enough parking, then you've lost some space for a potential housing or dwelling unit.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next item, which is 17596 permitted uses. Pine Hill Road Development District. One more. Very good, thank you. So the article reads, are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number blank as proposed by the Planning Board for the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to amend the Pine Hill Road Development District, Section 17596, permitted uses by deleting A for multifamily dwellings in its entirety and inserting a new subsection B, multifamily dwellings, in accordance with sections 175, 143 through 175, 145. And as previous, the purpose of this article is to allow more than one multifamily dwelling on a lot, and it will allow the Pine Hill Road Development District to use the current multifamily ordinances in sections 175, 143 through 175, 145. Again, allowing, hopefully, opportunity for more more multifamily or more places to live in town. Would anybody on the board like to make comment? Would anybody from the public like to speak to this? All right. We'll move on to the next one, which is 175-100. This is for the South Wolfeboro Limited Business District. Are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number blank as proposed by the Planning Board for the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to amend South Wolfeboro Limited Business District Section 175-100K permitted uses by deleting K multifamily housing and inserting in place thereof K multifamily dwellings in accordance with sections 175-143 through 175-145. This article is meant to replace the existing permitted use of multifamily housing with a reference to the current multifamily ordinances in section 175-143 through 175-145. This will bring the South Wolfeboro Limited Business District in line with other districts for multifamily dwellings. Any other comments from the board and from the public?
I don't have the paperwork with me, but my understanding, if I recall, is this the same no residences on the first floor? No, okay. Then I don't remember. Never mind.
All right, thank you, Audrey.
This just changes multi-family housing to multifamily dwellings, basically, to make the ordinance consistent.
Go on to the next slide. Oh. Take your time. One more. There we go. This is for the Center Street Route 28 Mixed-Use Business District. Are you in favor of the adoption of amendment number blank as proposed by the Planning Board for the Wolfeboro Planning and Zoning Ordinance to amend section 175-144 by inserting the words, quote, Center Street Route 28 Mixed-Use Business District, unquote, so the section shall read section 175-144 requirements for the VR, R, and GR and all commercial districts except CBD, WF, and Center Street Route 28 Mixed-Use Business Districts. The explanatory statement is this article removes multifamily dwellings as a permitted use in the Center Street Route 28 Mixed-Use Business District. Any other comments from the board? No.
At the October 15th public forum, it was suggested that this was a carve-out of multifamily dwellings in this area. Under the current ordinance, the multifamily dwellings area where they can be built ends just past the Westlake complex. If you look at the handout, it's where the light green turns to yellow. To the left is where multifamily dwellings. So other than the Center Street Mixed-Use Business District, they are not allowed in this area.
Any comment from the public?
So am I right in thinking this is the corner that the 7-Eleven is on? Because the Westlake, the Chinese restaurant is further in town. There's one little spot, but the rest of it is the whole intersection just west of 7-Eleven, including a little bit of North Line Road and 109 South. So this being one of the only places that you are removing multifamily housing from, it does certainly look like a carve-out. And given that multifamily dwellings are permitted in many of the residential areas that are very close to the lakes, other lakes, I don't quite understand what the need is for taking this out of here. When you look at planning long-term, you can't assume that the parcels that are there are going to be used like they are. The whole point of planning is to create a situation in which over time that area segues to look like something else that you want it to look like. So do we not want the commercial area to have multifamily dwellings? Going back to the other articles, do we not want the commercial areas to have commercial? So what is the purpose of taking it out of this section?
When you look at this, do you have the handout that shows this? The area which is where the CSMUB is owned by the Wentworth Watershed Association, as are the parcels on the left-hand side of 109, the corner lot and the one below it, and they're held for conservation purposes. The larger parcel has been mapped, and basically the whole thing is wetland mapped by a soil scientist. So there really isn't a good location here to put multifamily dwellings in this area. So rather than point people to a place where they really are not going to be easy to use, are not really adopted to multifamily dwellings, the thinking was to remove the area.
So using that same theory, my map has at least 2 parcels in that junction that have existing houses that could be 4-unit buildings. And there's several parcels to the north of Center Street that could be rebuilt into elderly housing, which is something that's permitted in that zone. However, apparently, they wouldn't be able to have apartments. But why is that more important than, say, Oakwood Road, where you have 4 parcels with single-family dwellings on them that can be turned into 4-unit apartment buildings, right on the point, surrounded by water? This is why I don't understand the totality of looking at what the issue is with all the information that could possibly be gathered for this board by a competent planner who spends some time with it. And again, I think it should wait.
Thank you, Audrey.
So our contention with all of these parcels, except for that last scalpel job to protect Lake Wentworth, basically, and the wetlands that are surrounding it, is that it's already permitted there. So we're not changing it, we're just clarifying it. The multifamily, we're just trying to say it is allowed, and then just sending them to the right section.
I believe you're saying it is not allowed in that instance. Okay. But still, the theory behind why you do it someplace and not someplace else if it's based on protecting the watershed. We have very sensitive areas in all the other residential districts as well. So why carve this out?
So it is the only protective move in all of those 5 articles. The others, we believe it's already allowed. And in this case, we are carving it out because it's sensitive. Now, in the future, maybe we prove that Oakwood Road is sensitive and other things like that need to be carved out. But at the moment, they are, our interpretation is multifamily dwellings are allowed there currently.
Audrey, I would suggest that you've suggested things that we should look into, and perhaps next year we can bring something which is looking at the issue that you have. But right at this moment, it is not possible to make that change, as far as I can understand.
I guess what I'm suggesting is there is a possible way to make the change, and that's table this until next year. I just hate to see you all maybe, get this not passed again for the second year, and what a shame that would be.
All right, thank you. Would anybody else like to speak? If not, then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is 175, terms defined, short-term rental, and Roger will lead that.
Thank you. The first step with this is the definition of a short-term rental, which is not currently in the zoning ordinance. It does build on or work in concert with the definition of a dwelling unit that was previously discussed. And the proposed definition is the rental of any dwelling unit or portion thereof for an occupancy of less than 30 consecutive days.
Was there any public comment?
I don't get to say this very often, but you guys did a lot of work on this, and I appreciate it. And it's not perfect, but thanks.
Thank you.
Bobby Bedman. I just have a question. Earlier, you had stated that without the definition, changing the definition on the section 175, to add the dwelling unit, I just guess I don't understand why on the short-term rental definition, we're not including it there also, just in case that first article, warrant article, fails. I would, however, comment, though, on describing a dwelling unit, because I know, like, right over here, we have a short-term rental that it's just beds and bathrooms, basically. So I just feel like maybe adding a section that said underneath the definition of dwelling unit, adding dwelling unit is defined as rental space, a building or portion thereof, providing living facilities for one or more person that can include provisions for sleeping and sanitation. This use shall not be deemed to include such transient occupancies as hotels, motels, boarding houses, inns, or bed and breakfasts. And then use your dwelling unit definitions under your new A, B, and C. I just think that the initial dwelling unit needs to take out eating and cooking and living, because a lot of the short-term rentals do not have those attached to them. I guess I'm just worried if one passes and the other doesn't, as you stated earlier, then this doesn't move forward.
Well, if this were adopted, we would have a short-term rental definition. The question would be whether there was a conflict within the ordinance. we tried to take a dwelling unit definition and then use it to talk about a single-family dwelling, a duplex, and a multifamily in light of the Supreme Court decision, just to try and improve and clarify our definitions. And then the short-term rental builds on that definition.
I think that one of the things that Bobby said was related to the fact that there are some of these places being rented that don't have stoves and things like that, but the definition says or portion thereof, which I think then includes what you're talking about.
There may also be a question whether that falls under the definition of a motel or hotel. Or a boarding house, which is not a permitted use in the town.
I think my concern is that you stated earlier, if you do not change the dwelling unit, the A, B, and C you stated earlier, then this, essentially, we're negating it. So shouldn't we have those definitions added right onto the short-term rental definition underneath it, just in case one passes and the other doesn't?
Well, they're really separate definitions. I think the question is, if one passed and the other didn't, how that conflict or how that might be construed. Ideally, they all pass. I think we need to improve our definition of a dwelling unit going forward, irrespective of short-term rentals.
I would just like to request if the handouts, Mary Jane Shelton, if the handouts could match what the slides are and what you're talking about, because I'm having a hard time following this because it doesn't match up. It didn't earlier and it still doesn't. So, where exactly are you in this? I've got all the handouts from there, but I can't even comment.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have slides to go up on the screen for the short-term rental discussion. So what you see on the screen now is just the end of the discussion from the multifamily. So at the moment, we're not using the screen as reference for the current discussion. Through the handouts. The question was how you're supposed to follow what we're doing, and the answer is through the handouts. I believe all of the things that Roger is discussing are included in the handouts.
So you're doing this. Okay.
And then I'm going to do this.
And I apologize, but I wasn't here for the previous discussion. So this follow-up, can I get a summary of the historical, what this is a follow-up to, what things have been decided, I guess? I'm not quite sure. Because my interpretation was nothing's been decided upon, correct?
Correct. Nothing's been decided upon. The purpose of the hearings this evening are to present to the public the warrant articles that the planning board would like to propose to be voted on during the March election in 2025. And for the history of this, we've been talking about short-term rentals for a couple of years now. So I would suggest if you want a summary, you can go through some of the old planning board agendas and view the YouTube videos.
Agree. I used to take the minutes for the planning board, so I know how many years it goes back, but at some point when, so if someone has a problem with the less than 30 consecutive days, how do they voice that?
Right now, during the public comment section.
That's my opinion, less than 30 days. I have been a homeowner for over 25 years. bought my property as a second home for my kids, who are now, thankfully, in their mid to late 20s. And when I first bought it, I needed to rent it in order to afford the taxes. And if anything should happen to me, I'm passing this house on to them. I would, and they live in various parts of the country, I would like for them to be able to rent it to help offset some of the costs. And so how do I voice that I feel is a right that is being taken from me? And I bought the property under the premise that this could be done, and now I'm facing that I could lose that. And I don't feel that that is fair.
You just got to the next item on the agenda, which is the short-term rental ordinance itself, which deals with issues you just raised.
So let me go to the next point here. Yeah, so we haven't closed the first one. We'll do that. You can make one more statement, and then we'll move on. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I just do want to reiterate. So if you go back to, Peter, when you said that the portion thereof, if you read your dwelling unit, a building or portion thereof providing complete independent living facilities for one or more person, including permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. It's saying all those things, including. So some of these short-term rentals, nowhere in that dwelling unit do they have living or cooking. They just have beds and sanitation. The problem is in the language it says including permanent provisions for living. It doesn't say any part of that.
I believe that the definition of dwelling unit is reasonably clear, and if any portion of that is rented, as in you're renting out one room, 2 rooms, or whatever, then I think that this particular definition holds.
I don't have a definition of a motel in front of me, but I think that could well fall under the definition of either a motel or a hotel as they're defined in our ordinance. And that would mean it's not a dwelling unit and therefore it would be regulated under those sections. Because it would no longer be a dwelling unit.
Is there any further public comment? This is, and mind you, we're still on the definition of short-term rental.
I'm going to, at the risk of, do I have to identify myself again? Ann Blodgett. At the risk of repeating myself on the entire subject of short-term rentals, there's so much more beyond this warrant article that the public needs to know that you will address and partner potentially with the Board of Selectmen about enforcement, about the ordinances that are coupled, that are problematic with short-term rentals, that cause the problems. And if we're looking at this in a vacuum, I'm afraid the public is not going to accept it. They've got to see how it's going to roll out. We're not famous for enforcement in this town. You're putting forth something that talks about enforcement. is it just pie in the sky? Or is there going to be a plan to couple it with, as Kathy mentioned in the last meeting, potentially going to the Board of Selectmen and talking about the vulnerabilities that we have, that this is brought up, that by having these hearings, you're hearing what the issues are, and they need to be addressed in a broader way in our town. Otherwise, this is just another thing on the books that people are going to laugh at and take advantage of, especially those who are grandfathered. And the grandfathering thing, for those of us who are concerned about neighborhoods, those who are grandfathered are really set apart in a separate class. And if there aren't other ways to keep the peace, I fear that this is really just another unenforced thing. Thank you.
So I'd say that some of the issues you talked about, Ann, will be in the next section that Roger's about to introduce with regard to short-term rental regulation. And we're aware that enforcement is an issue, but the means that we're presenting here are what are available to the planning board. There are other means to regulate short-term rentals that the Board of Selectmen might use, but we don't have any control over that. Hold on a second.
I think part of the question is, do you want half a loaf or no loaf? Because that's what it comes down to. This is what we can do as a planning board. State statutes are absolutely clear. We cannot prohibit legally existing non-conforming uses.
I know I'm getting into this late, but, and I have followed this and I have heard both sides of it, and maybe, well, I guess I'm responding to the 30-day rule. Isn't that what we were talking about? Okay. So doing it less than 30 days puts a hardship on a lot of people, whether it's the people that I have historically rented to relatives of my neighbors. I have rented to employees that I worked with in Massachusetts. A lot of them cannot afford 30 days of vacation time or to come up here. So, you know, I have rented at 1 week at a time. And I live in a small neighborhood. I've always been considerate. I tell my neighbors who's renting. I post the rules. I police it. I do everything. And I think I keep hearing all these horrible stories, and I feel bad about that. But that's not who I am, because I care about my property, that it is taken care of, and also that whoever I rent to, and they share the community beach, that they get along with my neighbors, because I want them to be repeat renters. And I've even former Wolfeboro residents who lived in my community come and rent from me. But they cannot afford a month. It's the time from work, the investment, everything else. And so I think putting 30 days is very, very restrictive for people who are planning a family vacation and have a budget. Who has the money for a month? I used to rent in Alton for a month, and this was 29 years ago. It cost me $7,000 a month. I could, you know, I'm renting to people who just want to come up for the week. And I don't think that they should be penalized.
Or unless you want me to. Well, no, I don't think we the whole thing. Takes too long. Yeah, so let me close this. If there's no more public comment on the definition of short-term rental, then we'll move on to the next section, which is short-term rental, an article to regulate short-term rentals.
I believe this will answer some of your questions. The intent of this ordinance is to address things like neighborhood impact, septic loading at a time of increased cyanobacteria, and also the effect on affordable housing. We have taken into account input we received at the public forum on October 15th. And first and foremost, this does not prohibit short-term rentals. In fact, it permits short-term rentals by conditional use permit. Before it required going to this Board of Adjustment for a special exception. We have changed that, so it's a conditional use permit, which would be issued by the Planning Board. We also, previously it was it was 2 people per bedroom. Based on the input we received, it now is 2 persons per bedroom plus 2 additional occupants. We did include a requirement that the property owner or designated property manager shall provide contact information and shall be available to address any issues arising during the rental periods. The other changes were basically fairly minor. Under A3, it's now no space can be used as a sleeping area without proper access and egress. And then under D, we put in the specific section of the off-street parking just to make that easier to find. And I do have an amendment I will make to this when that time comes, but so we will know what it's going to be. First of all, I'm going to make an amendment that we delete sections G and H of the proposed ordinance, and that we amend section A to read, as part of the approval process and every 2 years thereafter, the dwelling unit must pass an inspection by the Wolfeboro Fire and Rescue Department and by the code enforcement officer, which shall include the following. And so I will make that change. Any lawfully existing short-term rental we cannot regulate through zoning by state law. So if it's lawfully existing, this would not apply. Under section 175-43C, there is a provision in the zoning ordinance regarding abandonment, which reads, any non-conforming use that is discontinued or abandoned for a period of 1 year or more cannot be resumed. So if this is passed by the voters in March, lawfully existing will need to come in, establish that they were lawfully existing, and this will not apply to them. I will point out that under state statute RSA 676:12, that the code officer cannot issue a permit after the legal notice of the proposed changes have been posted, and that has happened. If the proposed change would, if the change was adopted, justify refusal of the permit. Basically, that means that after a week ago Saturday, when the notice was posted, that anybody who wanted to put in a short-term rental between now and town meeting would have to comply with this ordinance. And then it would depend on the outcome of the vote in March. But if you're an existing short-term rental that has been in existence, this would not apply to you.
Roger, can you comment on, because the if you haven't rented in the last year or more, can you explain how our ordinance would still apply to people who may not have rented this past year, as far as the non-conforming status is concerned? I think that's
Well, if you had been renting short term, you would need to establish that you had been doing that, and if it were discontinued or abandoned for a period of 1 year or more, then it cannot be resumed. There are two provisions related to abandonment. One is an intent to abandon and some act that in furtherance of doing that. So it is nuanced. So if you were renovating your house and it took a year and you'd had short-term rentals before, in all likelihood you could continue. If you had it on the market for a year and nobody rented because they just wanted, the rent was too high or for whatever, that would not necessarily constitute abandonment. But if you've rented it regularly for years and years, then you're grandfathered, and that will be determined on an individual basis.
And if, for instance, for life circumstances, I moved up here full-time, so I was living in the house and not renting it. But if I get hit by a bus or move away, are you telling me that my house, which is in a trust with my kids, they cannot rent it? You're saying no, they can't, or no, that's not right?
No, that's not right. They would have to comply with this ordinance, but they could rent it. We are not banning short-term rentals anywhere in the town with this ordinance. We're saying you need to get a conditional use permit from the planning board, and you have to comply with the requirements of this ordinance. But it does not prohibit short-term rentals at all in the town. The only way it would prohibit short-term rentals potentially is if the definition passed and the ordinance didn't.
So just to be clear, if all of the ordinances that we're proposing pass, it would not prohibit short-term rentals. It would simply regulate them.
And I'll add one other thing. In terms of the removal of G and H, which talk about violations, what would happen is that if on the every 2-year inspection a unit did not pass, it would be treated as a zoning violation. The owner would receive a citation, and then if the owner did not bring the property into compliance, then a zoning enforcement action would be taken.
Any further public comment? No?
Kind of fun, isn't it? Huh? No. Roger, just Peter Cook, 116 and 126 South Main. If you remove H, just for clarification, you were saying that. I guess my concern is that if you're in violation every 2 years, that you have your fire department inspection, for example. But if you are constantly overloading the property, don't you lose the enforcement of? Isn't that a violation as well? And how would you address that in terms of either revocation of a permit?
It would be addressed as a zoning violation. The codes officer, at the time, yes. If you're violating the ordinance either for parking or for too many people,
Take H out, aren't you just taking a look at that every 2 years in terms of revoking?
No, I looked at if my amendment to Section A would be as part of the approval process and every 2 years thereafter. So you can do the inspection every 2 years, and if there's a violation, then the owner has to either bring the violation into compliance or he gets his own enforcement action. If in the interim he is violating the ordinance, then he would need to bring that into compliance at the time. So you're not a 2-year waiting period. And if somebody has, well, the code officer, yes. Yep. Well, we're not the enforcement people. And the selectmen, if it got to that point.
So you have nothing to do with the... Can you speak into the mic if you're asking a question, please, or reiterate question? So just to be clear, there is, as far as enforcement, whether it's during the 2-year period or at the time of renewal, if there was a violation, the permit would go away. If there was a complaint in the meantime, that complaint would be filed with the Code Enforcement Office, and then Code Enforcement Office would then do what? What is their recourse in terms of enforcement? So if they enforce it, it either stops or they go to the selectmen, and the selectmen are charged with enforcing it.
There is an enforcement action that can be taken under RSA 670, 617, 17A, or 17B. But because it is a amendment to the zoning ordinance, it's covered with by those regulations, and we can't revoke a permit. We did initially try to come up with a license agreement that would not be properties would not be grandfathered, and that you could take some of these other actions, but that would need to be adopted by the Board of Selectmen, and we were advised by the Board of Selectmen's attorney that he didn't feel there was authority for that. So we are trying to do this as what the planning board can do. There may be other avenues. Obviously, there's the enforcement issue. There's a trash ordinance, which I have seen effectively used, and there are other ordinances, and there may be some other ordinances that can be looked at beefing up. The planning board is trying to do what we're able to do at this time. We don't think the problem, unless this is the end-all and be-all solution, but we think it is a first step, and there's a Board of Selectmen that can be approached. We certainly, have an interest in seeing how this works out, and we're trying to do our part to address something that has come before us as an issue. So you think H is not?
So you're removing H because you don't believe it's enforceable the way it's written, that it conflicts with state law in terms of enforcement, and that needs to go over to the selectmen to do that?
I'm removing G and H, and it would then be a zoning enforcement issue.
Which you think is the only thing you can do? You can't do H.
Right. I mean, it would be, if it's a violation of the zoning ordinance, there is a $100 fine per day fine. In the ordinance, I think it's 175, 189, maybe, it's somewhere in there.
Further questions or comments? Yes.
Marge Hart, Wolfeboro. I have a question about parking. In the front of it, it talks about the maximum number of occupants shall be 2 bedroom plus 2 additional occupants. And then on the back side, it says on D, property must be in compliance with the current parking requirements of Article 22, off-street parking and loading requirements. And in looking at that, it has a single-family duplex, 2 spaces per dwelling unit, may include indoor parking spaces. Spaces serving individual units may be stacked. If you have a single-family dwelling unit that has 5 bedrooms and could sleep 10 plus an additional 2 parking spots is not going to be enough for 12 people. So how does that get enforced, and what happens with the additional people that are trying to park on a city street that already does not have parking available? I think that needs to be addressed because it's going to become a fact. Thank you.
It does require that all parking be on site, so they cannot park on the street or on somebody else's property for that matter.
Okay, so you're saying that for a single dwelling unit that has 2 parking spots, it can only be 2 cars for that, and if they don't do that, that's in violation. Is that correct?
No, I'm saying that they can't park on the street, no matter how many cars are there. But I think you raise an interesting point, and I have seen ordinances that refer the number of required spaces to the number of bedrooms, and that may be something we want to consider.
Roger, do you have any further comments on this section? Oh, Ann, yeah.
Okay, parking. Now I'm confused because there are a number of short-term rentals that park on the street and have multiple cars on the street because that's allowed in that neighborhood. So, but short-term rentals won't be allowed to park on the street. Interesting. You like that? I do too. Because there are a few I can think of where there are multiple cars on the street because otherwise they're parking on the lawn. Okay, score 1 for the neighborhoods. I just wanted to say that it seems like, and I've said this before, that you guys have cut a path that is doable. It's not optimum for everybody. It's optimum for public safety. It certainly helps. It helps start things off, like talking about the noise ordinance. So maybe we all need to show up if noise continues to be an issue from short-term rentals. It's a start. As Roger says, it's legal. It's going to pass muster. And that's important because we need to get going with some kind of baseline so that neighborhoods feel like they have support from town hall when their neighbors are, when they have short-term rentals that are out of control and they don't know where to turn, and the police can't help and code enforcement can't help because there's nothing on the books. So this puts something on the books. It's a start. I commend you for doing it. And I just think we need to keep explaining that fact, that it's a start and that it's not banning short-term rentals. It's making them safe and it's making them more acceptable to the overall public. Thank you.
Roger, any further comments on this section? All right.
Okay,
Before
we close the public hearing, we need to address the issues that were brought up by the fire chief and the code officer, I think, so that people are aware of them and can comment on them.
All right, so as Kathy mentioned, we did send the proposed ordinance over to both the code enforcement officer and the fire chief, and I'm looking for the comments now here we go. So some of the, I'm not going to read this whole letter, but I'll highlight the points from Chief Zadi. There he questioned what additional staff might be needed to enforce the ordinance. He's concerned about the workload for existing staff without any mechanism to support it. He questions whether the town should elect to create an inspector position outside of fire rescue department. The enforcement authority could be addressed with a memorandum of understanding between the chief of fire rescue and whatever other department that person would report to. There was concern about limiting the inspection items to the ones noted in the proposal, which Roger addressed by a slight change in wording. And then there was a question about the terminology of emergency egress as compared to means of escape. Particularly that emergency egress is a significantly higher level of safety than means of escape, which the fire chief presumes what is intended, and I would presume that as well. For example, a window cannot be a part of egress, but it can be a means of escape. And I think our concern was if somebody creates a bedroom in a room that does not have a proper means of escape, that would be a concern for public safety. So I think that we would want to amend the regulations to show that there should be two means of escape rather than two means of egress. And the fire chief goes on to say that he supports the concept of requiring permits for STRs and setting minimum standards. And we'd have to have further consideration. And then with regard to Jason's comments, which I don't have in front of me. Do you have them? Oh, there, thank you. So from the code enforcement officer, he also questions the ability of the adequate staff to do the enforcement, which we've spoken about. He echoes many of Chief Zadi's comments, particularly with terms of egress and potential changes in the building code. Several comments regarding the workload and the ability to enforce. And then lastly, comments about the septic system evaluation and who would be eligible to officially deem a septic system in failure, which would be a health officer or a licensed designer. So there's concern about how that inspection would be done. He then goes on at the end to reiterate the strain on both the code enforcement and building department should they need the additional staff for enforcement. Thank you, Kathy. Any further questions? Oh, Bobby?
I think this question's going to go to you, Brad. Do you know how we apply the meals and rooms tax, how we allocate it when those funds come back from the state? Because this essentially is going to increase the meals and rooms tax, so is there a way we can allocate those funds to code enforcement?
I don't know if there's a way you could change how they're coming in now to reallocate them, but I believe right now everything that comes in for that would go to the general fund. That's how it's set up.
Any further comments from the public? All right, we'll close the public hearing on that item, and we'll move on to Article 31, Conditional Use Permit, 175-215, Review of Conditions for Grant of Permit. You can close the PowerPoint if you like. We're not using that anymore. You can just close it. Yeah.
Currently, the section 175-215 of the zoning ordinance, which is review of conditions for grants of a conditional use permit, solely addresses accessory dwelling units. Since we are proposing that short-term rentals be addressed by conditional use permits. The language needs to be changed to include that. So this revision amends Section 215 to provide that not just accessory dwelling units, but conditional uses set forth in this ordinance. So it would apply to accessory dwelling units, also to short-term rentals. And then under B, it includes the language currently in the ordinance about accessory dwelling units, that they have to maintain the aesthetic continuity for the primary dwelling unit as a single-family dwelling, and that the ADU entry door is not visible from the street. So it does not in any way change conditional use permits as they apply to accessory dwelling units. It simply enables short-term rentals to be granted by conditional use permit.
Open public comment for this? Would anybody like to speak to this? Any further comment from the board? All right, thank you. Then we'll close that item for Article 31 and go on.
Now we have to go and decide what to do.
All right, Kathy brings up a good point. Now we have what to do with each of these. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We need a motion
Yeah.
to either pass it on to the town hall or continue it.
So, as Kathy points out, we need a motion to either pass it on to the warrant or continue it. I would propose, given that there were some suggestions from the public to make some changes to several sections here, that we continue these to the next meeting where we can introduce some proposed changes.
Okay, so you want to continue all of them?
Our next meeting is January 7th, and we have a fairly full agenda, and the last date we can hold a public hearing is January 21st, so that we would have to advertise for the January 21st hearing, and so I'm not sure when we would have an opportunity to go over and address these. Before it was necessary to put forth the public notice of the hearing on the 21st. So I think we should talk about them now. We have people who are interested enough to show up. The petition, are you asking about the petition zoning amendment? That will be the subject of a public hearing, assuming we schedule it on January 7th. And all we will do tonight is set a date for a public hearing on that, after which the planning board is required to either recommend or not recommend the warrant article.
All right, so with regard to the 10 proposed warrant articles that we've reviewed this evening, some of them need substantial changes.
It seems like the dwelling unit is, it seems like the first one, the dwelling unit is simply a clarification of what's now in the regulations. So I'd make a motion to move this to the town warrant, the 2025 town warrant.
All right, Kathy's made the motion. Julie has seconded the motion. Any further discussion?
Which one is this one?
We're talking about the first one, 175, terms defined dwelling unit. Yeah, if there's no further comment from the board, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None opposed. All right.
Okay, the next one is the conservation subdivision, and I'd like to make a motion to pass this on to the town 2025 warrant. I think this is a really good proposal and replaces one that actually Vaughn and I helped put together quite a few years ago, but it hasn't been used, so I think this is a very positive change.
All right, Kathy's made a motion. Would anybody like to second?
I would.
All right, Roger seconds. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes.
I would like to consider the multifamily, at least initially, proposals together, because I would reiterate my motion that I think we should table these for this year. I think that issues have been raised regarding them. They seem to be the subject of confusion, and I think we've got some warrant articles that, such as the dwelling, conservation subdivision, and short-term rental ordinance that are more important, and we could be muddying and confusing the waters if we bring all of these up, and it'll be just a large package of proposed amendments and warrant articles. So I would like to suggest that we take additional time, look at these, and come back as needed in the future.
I'll second that motion.
All right, so just to reiterate, Roger, your motion is to take 175-71 permitted uses, 175-81 permitted uses for village residential, and general residential. And then the next one is 175-106H permitted uses for Bay Street Limited Business District, and 175-116H permitted uses for Wolfeboro Falls Limited Business District. The next one is 175-96 permitted uses for Pine Hill Road Development District. The next one is 175-100K permitted uses for South Wolfeboro Limited Business District. And lastly, 175-144 for Center Street Route 28 Mixed Use Business District, to take all 5 of those and table them. Is that right?
Yes.
And Kathy, you second?
Yes.
All right, very good. Any further discussion?
I think it would be prudent to wait until we have a town planner to more carefully analyze if there are any outlier lots that we should be concerned about.
Any other comment? No. Peter.
Would it be possible for us at this time to look at this a little further and see what reactions are and table them at the next meeting? In other words, we could continue it, but we may end up pulling them at that time.
We're tabling this, I think.
Well, the motion is to table it.
I think we aren't going to have, we've got a full agenda on the 7th. This does need to go out be noticed, and I don't think we have an opportunity to evaluate these and make any significant revisions. Again, I think the volume is a concern, and I think at the public hearing, the public forum on the October 15th, that there was noticeable confusion, and that seems to have continued. And I think if we're going to go forward with something, we need to make sure people understand what it is we're doing.
Okay, so you're talking about tabling it and not moving ahead with this to put on the town warrant. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the motion's been made to table it and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Very good. One abstain. All right, Julie abstains. The next one is for short-term rental. Roger, do you want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we move warrant article 175, terms defined short-term rental, to the town warrant.
Second. Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No? All right, that moves forward.
I really think that we need to look this a little further and continue this public hearing until the second meeting in January so that we can address some of the concerns. Okay, that's my motion.
If we continue the discussion to the second meeting in January, then this will not appear on the town warrant, because we cannot hold a public hearing after, I think it's January 23rd.
So the second meeting in January would be the 21st. Yeah.
So at the first meeting, table this because there have been some changes, and I think this is the proper way to go until January 7th.
Yeah, I think as Roger said, the concern is that January 7th is already a very full meeting. So I guess the question is, how long an evening do we want to put in? Because this is certainly an important issue to address. I'm sorry.
We've already had one of the public hearing dropped out. I think there are just two. And then there are two or three people that are coming to just describe their projects to us. So I don't really think that's a terribly long meeting.
Yeah, Kathy's point is that several of the people on the calendar for the January 7th meeting are non-binding, as we say, the preliminary presentation. So hopefully they can be kept to a short period. So perhaps it would be useful to continue this to the January 7th meeting. Do you have any thought, Roger?
It's 10 after 9 now, and I am a firm believer that the quality of decisions declines after 10 o'clock, but that would leave us 50 minutes to discuss this, and I don't think it needs that much more in the way of changes. I think that a lot of what was in Chief Zade's and the code officer's comments, some of it's addressed here. The police department has added the fire department has added one new member for the past 3 years. If the ambulance warrant article passes, there will be increased staff. And obviously, I think we are all aware that there's a lack of a town planner, which is an issue that hopefully will be resolved before too much longer. But I think we should get this passed. We should get it out there. If there are problems with enforcement, it should be addressed. But my wife and her sister owned a house in New Jersey, and they rented it for the summer, and that had to be inspected every year by the fire department and the codes officer, and a lot more people down there than there are up here. And I also think with Chief Zade's comments that he wasn't quite sure the distinction between this would only impact new proposals, and I don't think you're going to be inundated with short-term rental proposals. And as they came in, they could be inspected, and the 2 years would be on a staggered basis, and it would be only those new short-term rentals going into the future. So I think maybe we want to look at the parking requirement under D. I think that was an interesting point. And also we need to ratify the amendment I described early on. And perhaps we want to have one parking space for every bedroom. But I'm not sure there's much to be gained in delaying this till the 7th of January.
I would suggest that this really applies to new short-term rentals. And so those people who are looking to have a new short-term rental would end up looking at the parking spaces as something that they need to deal with. And the people who have existing ones don't need to worry about that. So I think that it's something which would then allow the people who wanted to start short-term rentals to examine what they were doing.
I think that we should perhaps get the revised text amended as we described tonight, and then move it to warrant on January 7th with a very short discussion. Not a lengthy one, but just to review the ordinance as newly proposed.
Yeah, I have no problem with that approach.
Yeah, I would agree with that approach as well, but I would say that...
Motion, and that was just seconded? Is that-
I'd like to make a motion that we review the rewording edited version on the 7th of January briefly, just so that it's clear what we are adopting, and then on that day plan to move it to warrant.
Do you want to include the revised language in your motion? You did? Well, do you want me to read it? Yeah, I guess.
Before you do that, Roger.
I think it needs to go on the town website, and planning board members need to see it, and then we can vote on it, and that's why I wanted to have it on January 7th.
I'd also suggest that there would be some changes to the text that we haven't gone over clearly this evening. So to Roger's point, we still have some time this evening. I would suggest that we go through it quickly now and make sure that we've captured all the changes that we mean to. Roger, would you like to lead that discussion?
Well, I think that the one changes we need is what I mentioned earlier, that Section A be revised to read as part of the approval process, and every 2 years thereafter, the dwelling unit must pass an inspection by the Wolfeboro Fire and Rescue Department and by the code enforcement officer, which shall include. And then I would amend the proposal by deleting current sections G and H.
I would also suggest that, that's what I'm about to do, Vaughn, thank you. For 175 blank A2, for criteria for approval, 2 should be reworded to read, all doors and windows designed to provide emergency escape rather than egress must be in compliance with building codes. And then for just below it, A3, again, replace egress with escape, and potentially remove the words with properly sized windows or doors. So it would just read, there are 2 means of escape conforming to the New Hampshire State Fire Code and New Hampshire State Building Code. Does anybody have any concern with that? Could we say current building code? I'm not sure that that adds anything to it, but certainly we could.
Any building code that's enforceable is current only.
I think we do want to address the windows and doors. And as I read Chief Sadi's comments, the means of escape would include a sprinklered building, and we're not really dealing with sprinklered buildings here. So I would not change that part of the ordinance. I would keep it the way it is because right now it says all doors and windows designed provide emergency egress must be in compliance with applicable codes, but he seems to be saying something slightly different, that it's not necessarily doors and windows. And I think when you say doors and windows, everybody knows what you're talking about.
That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. So then we would leave A2 and A3 as written? Okay.
I think in 3 you could say means of escape and then delete with property sized windows and doors if it conforms to New Hampshire code.
I didn't have to really have the mic. I was going to say, look down on Tom Zotti's message to us on number 4. The term emergency egress provides a significantly higher level of safety than means of escape, which is intended to base on the references to windows. Windows cannot be part of egress. I think that's why he said means of escape, because a window cannot be an egress. Technical words.
Yeah, the other thing that Tom Zotti brought up was the fact that they were concerned about if they were going to be inspecting, what if they saw violations, that it would then go beyond what our ordinance is stating, and that they were concerned about putting the town in a bad position, basically.
I'm going to go back just for a moment to the escape versus egress. What Chief Zotti wrote is that the term emergency egress provides a significantly higher level of safety than means of escape, which I presume is intended for the reference to windows. And further goes on to say that windows cannot be part of egress. So if we mandate that there must be 2 means of egress and windows are not part of egress, that means that every sleeping space has to have 2 doors. I don't have any bedrooms in my house that have 2 doors. So I think having 2 means of egress is going to be a showstopper. No further comment. All right, so I guess then we're back to changing egress to escape in A2 and A3. We can certainly leave in the properly sized windows or doors, but changing 2 instances of egress to escape.
And to address Kathy's concern about, Tom Zotti's and Jason's, to obtain approval, the inspection is to include, which is a change from the limited to, these 4 items. If in the course of inspecting for those 4 items, the fire department or the codes officer comes across some other violation, they certainly are welcome, they certainly can pursue it. They just can't go looking for other violations when they come in to inspect for this purpose. It already says that. I mean, we don't take away their obligations or what they can do, which is governed by statute.
All right, so to address that, we're changing be limited, we're changing that to include, shall include. And that doesn't prohibit them from looking at anything else. Okay. Any other comments? All right. Sorry, Julie.
Thank you. Flip it over here to the parking bit. Should we just leave the last line out, that all parking shall be on site? And just say that they need to follow their loading, parking and loading requirements of the zoning ordinance? I mean, if somebody's bringing in 3 cars, there's only 2 parking places, they're just going to have to find another place in a public parking area to park. It's not up to us to tell them. They're going to have to figure it out.
So there was some public comment earlier this evening in contrast to what you just suggested, because people are concerned about the public parking on the street. So it's up to us to decide whether we want to restrict parking or not.
I'll just lend my personal thing. My daughter was living in Chicago and they had to park a good 10 to 15 minute walk away. That was where they could have parking in a paid for lot. First come, first serve. So it's rather common that you have to find a place to park. My other daughter has the same thing. They have one place to park. They have 2 cars. They search for parking like everybody else does.
Yeah, I would say certainly people have to search for parking, but part of the purpose of this ordinance in general is to protect the full-time homeowners and residents of the town, and part of that is preserving their parking. If somebody has to walk for parking, I would think we'd rather have a visitor have to walk than have the full-time resident have to walk every day. Yeah, per the ordinance. So if you remove that last line, that would allow the short-term renters to park on the street and take up the parking that would be otherwise used by regular homeowners. Anybody else? No?
Yeah, I agree with Doug that if you eliminate that provision, there's going to park on the street. And that this way they have to find a place on the property to park. And if they don't have a big enough property, then maybe they aren't going to have as many people there.
All right, so Vaughn, do you want to restate your motion?
I move that we move the amended article to review on the 7th to then move it to the warrant article, to a warrant article.
I'll second that motion. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, very good, thank you. And then the last one is for the Article 31 conditional use permit. And I didn't...
Make a motion to pass this on to the town warrant, the 2025 town warrant.
Do we want to consider addressing criteria under immediate neighborhood impact? I tried to come up with some criteria and didn't necessarily find anything. I think we could either add criteria under immediate neighborhood impact, or we could delete that and simply address accessory dwelling units as a 4 in parentheses and read letter B, C.
Any comment from anybody? All right. Kathy made a motion to continue it as it's currently written. I'll second that motion. Any discussion? I seconded it. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? 1 opposed, Roger. All right, so that's continued. And that's continued to the 7th, is that right?
No,
I'm sorry.
No, we just passed this on to the town warrant.
Oh, I'm sorry, we passed it on to the town warrant. Sorry. Next item on the agenda is a discussion item for a petition warrant article that was received by the town clerk.
I make a motion that we move the petition warrant article to public hearing on January 7, 2025 at the Great Hall at 7 p.m.
All right, Kathy, second that. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None? Very good, that passes. Any other business? Any further public comment? All right, I make a motion that we adjourn. Kathy seconds. All in favor? Aye.
I would like to thank our vast audience out there for taking the trouble to come. It is nice to see at least some people take an interest enough to show up in person and provide comments.
And I'll apologize for the technical difficulties we had this evening, and hopefully we'll resolve it next time. Thanks very much and good night.